She was standing in front of the bathroom mirror when I noticed it. Not the dress, though the dress was different, a deep burgundy thing I hadn't seen before, fitted in a way that her clothes hadn't been in a long time. Not the earrings, though those were different too, small gold drops that caught the light when she turned her head. What I noticed was the way she was looking at herself. Not critically, not with the habitual dissatisfaction she'd worn in front of mirrors for years. She was looking at her own reflection with something close to recognition, like she was meeting someone she'd missed. "You look good," I said from the doorway. She startled, just slightly. Then she smiled. And the smile had something in it I couldn't name, some interior warmth that wasn't directed at me. "Just wanted to feel pretty again," she said. I thought it was a good sign. I was wrong about that. My name is Joel. I'm 38 years old. I teach history at Millbrook High. American history, Civil War elective, the occasional advanced placement class that makes me remember why I chose the profession in the first place. Serena and I had been married for 7 years, together for 9. We had 2 boys. Noah was 6 and building increasingly complex Lego structures that colonized the living room. And Caleb was 4 and in a phase of asking why approximately 40 times per hour. We lived in a house on Sycamore Street that we'd bought the year Noah was born, a craftsman with a front porch and a yard that needed more attention than I gave it. Serena had designed the interior herself. She'd worked as an interior designer before the boys, and the house showed it. Warm colors, intentional furniture, the kind of space that looked casual but had been carefully thought through. She'd stopped working when Noah arrived. That had been her choice, or it had presented itself as her choice, which I now understand is not necessarily the same thing. In the years since, I'd watched her pour herself into motherhood with the total commitment of someone who has decided that if they're going to do something, they're going to do it completely. She was a wonderful mother. Present, patient, creative, the kind of parent who turns a Tuesday afternoon into a project. Noah and Caleb adored her with the uncomplicated totality that young children reserve for whoever is their whole world. But somewhere in those years, something else had been happening. Something quieter. Something I had noticed in pieces without assembling the full picture. She had stopped talking about design. She'd stopped reading the shelter magazines she used to stack on the nightstand. When people asked what she did, she'd say, "I'm home with the boys," with a completeness that foreclosed follow-up questions. I'd taken that completeness as contentment. I should have asked what was underneath it. The night of the mirror, she was going out with Pam. Pam was Serena's closest friend in Millbrook. They'd met at a neighborhood event 2 years after we moved in, and had developed the kind of friendship that operates on its own internal schedule, lunches and walks and long phone calls that I'd always been glad Serena had. Pam was warm and funny and had a way of making Serena laugh that loosened something in her that daily life had gradually tightened. I liked Pam. That's worth saying, because it becomes relevant later. "Don't wait up," Serena said, coming into the kitchen to kiss the boys goodnight. She smelled like something I didn't recognize. Not her usual scent, something lighter and more deliberate. She kissed Noah on the top of his head. She kissed Caleb on both cheeks, which made him giggle. Then she looked at me. "You okay?" she asked. "Of course," I said. "Have a good time." She held my gaze for half a second longer than necessary. Then she picked up her bag and left. I stood in the kitchen and listened to the car back out of the driveway, and I felt, not suspicion exactly, something less formed than that. The faint atmospheric pressure of something I didn't have a name for yet. I put the boys to bed. I watched part of a documentary I'd been saving. I fell asleep on the couch and woke up at 12:40 to the sound of the front door opening. Serena moved through the dark living room quietly. She didn't turn on any lights. She sat down on the edge of the couch near my feet, and I heard her breathing slow, like someone releasing something they'd been holding. "Good night," I asked. She was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," she said. "Good night." Her voice had a texture to it that I couldn't place. Not alcohol, not fatigue. Something contained, like a letter sealed before it was fully written. I closed my eyes again. Looking back, that breathing, that specific sound of something released in the dark, was the first thing I should have asked about. I called it tired. It wasn't tired at all. The thing about low self-esteem is that it doesn't announce itself. It operates through substitution, replacing the direct language of need with 100 indirect gestures that can be misread as something else entirely. I had watched Serena's self-esteem erode over 7 years of marriage without ever calling it that. I'd called it adjustment. I'd called it the natural gravity shift of becoming a mother, the way identity redistributes itself around a child. I'd called it a phase. I'd called it tiredness. What I had not called it was an emergency, and that failure of naming had consequences. In the mornings, Serena moved through the kitchen in her robe with the distracted efficiency of someone managing a system rather than inhabiting a life. She made lunches and packed backpacks and fielded Caleb's questions with the patient automaticity of a person who has learned to function at a high level on very little fuel. She was competent. She was present. She was, by every observable measure, doing everything right. But she had stopped asking me how I looked at her. That's a specific thing to say, but it's accurate. Early in our relationship, and for years into our marriage, Serena had a way of positioning herself in my line of sight when she was dressed for something. Not aggressively, not obviously, but with the subtle choreography of someone who needed the confirmation available in a specific look. She wanted to be seen, not flattered seen. There's a difference. Somewhere around the time Caleb was born, she'd stopped doing that. I'd registered the absence without examining it. I'd told myself she'd grown into herself, become more secure. I didn't consider the alternative, that she'd stopped asking because she'd learned to expect nothing. Derek came over for dinner in early September. Derek was my oldest friend. We'd met freshman year of college, roomed together sophomore year, been in each other's lives through everything that followed. He was a contractor, ran his own small firm in Millbrook, and had the specific competence of someone who is never lost because he can always build his way out. He'd been best man at our wedding. He came to dinner 2 or 3 times a month. He was single, and the standing invitation was one of those habits of long friendship that had become structural. He arrived with beer and a story about a renovation job that had gone sideways in the specific way renovation jobs go sideways. And within 20 minutes the kitchen was loud with laughter, his and mine and Serena's, the boys orbiting the adults with the gravitational pull of children who want to be near the energy. I remember Serena at the counter, laughing at something Derek had said, and thinking, there she is. That looseness, that animation. I registered it as the effect of good company on a woman who spent most of her days with a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old. Perfectly reasonable. Nothing to examine. What I didn't register, what I should have registered, was the specific direction of her attention. She wasn't laughing at the table generally. She was laughing at Derek. That distinction, which I now see clearly, was invisible to me then because I had no framework that would make it significant. After dinner, Derek and I sat on the front porch with beers while Serena put the boys to bed. The evening was warm and slow, the kind of September night in Georgia that feels like an extension of summer rather than its ending. We talked about the usual things, his work, my classes, a football team we'd been following since college with the loyal irrationality of men who haven't updated certain allegiances since they were 20. He left around 10. On his way out, he hugged Serena, the standard brief hug of old familiarity, and said something quietly near her ear that I didn't catch. She laughed again, that same specific laugh, and said shut up in the tone that means the opposite. I noticed it, filed it as the easy shorthand of people who've known each other for years through a mutual connection. I know better now. The new clothes continued appearing. Not dramatically, 1 or 2 things a month, mixed in with ordinary purchases in a way that made each individual item unremarkable. A blouse, a pair of earrings, a cardigan in a color she'd never worn before, a soft terracotta that did something good for her coloring. She was exercising more too, I realized. Not that she'd mentioned starting, but I noticed the running shoes by the back door with dried mud on the soles, the yoga mat that had migrated from the closet to the corner of the bedroom. She looked good. That's the honest truth. She was emerging from something, or so it appeared, and the emergence looked healthy. Looked like the self-possession I'd been hoping she'd find again. You've been taking care of yourself, I said one evening, meaning it as a compliment. She looked at me from across the room. Something moved in her expression, a flicker of something I couldn't read. Trying to, she said. And then she went back to folding laundry with a focus that suggested the conversation was complete. I didn't push. I thought about how to tell her more directly that I noticed, that I thought she looked beautiful, that I was glad she seemed better. I thought about it. And then I thought about the papers I needed to grade before morning, and the conversation shifted into the back of my mind and stayed there. That's the honest accounting of it. Not cruelty, not indifference. The ordinary failure of a man who meant to say something important and found a smaller task more immediately pressing. Pam called me in October. This was unusual. Pam and I were friendly, but didn't have the kind of relationship that produced independent phone calls. Our contact existed in the context of couples and families, at the border of her friendship with Serena rather than as something separate. She said she was calling to ask if Serena seemed okay to me. Said she'd been worried, that Serena seemed distracted lately. Somewhere else, was how she phrased it. I told her I thought Serena was doing better actually. The exercise, the new energy. Pam was quiet for a moment in a way that felt like she was deciding something. Okay, she said. Good. That's good. She hung up quickly. Too quickly, I thought afterward, for a call she had placed. That call, Pam's pause, the speed of the ending, was the moment I should have called back and asked the real question. Something in her voice was telling me something. I chose not to hear it because hearing it would have required me to name a fear I wasn't ready to hold. November arrived, and with it a change in the weather and a change in Serena that was harder to attribute to the natural arc of seasons. She was present at home in body and increasingly absent in every other sense. She moved through the house with her phone in her hand in a way she hadn't before, not compulsively, but consistently, the phone always nearby, always within reach. When it buzzed, her face would change. Not dramatically, a small interior lighting. Gone in a second. I started watching for it. The thing about watching for something once you've decided to watch is that you begin to see it everywhere. And then you have to do the harder work of separating what is actually there from what your alert attention is manufacturing. I was aware of this problem. I was a history teacher. I knew about confirmation bias and motivated reasoning. I tried to apply that self-awareness. But the phone kept lighting her face in the way that my name on the screen did not. Derek had been around more than usual that fall. In retrospect, the frequency was remarkable. But in the moment, each visit had a plausible rationale. A dinner here, a game there, a Saturday when he came to look at a section of the porch railing that had started to rot and needed replacing. That last one, he spent 3 hours at our house, nominally examining wood and discussing repair timelines, actually sitting in the kitchen with coffee while I was in the backyard with the boys and Serena was inside. I hadn't thought much of it. Derek was good with his hands and had been patching things in our house for years as a natural expression of friendship. What I thought about later was this. I came inside at one point to refill the boys' water bottles, and the kitchen conversation stopped with a completeness that wasn't the ordinary trail-off of people interrupted. It stopped like a door closing. Derek was looking at the window. Serena was looking at the counter. They resumed talking a beat later, about the railing, I thought, but something had shifted in the air, some molecule of warmth that was no longer present. I filled the water bottles. I went back outside. I have thought about that moment many times since. The thing I understand now that I didn't understand then is that I already knew. Not consciously, not in any form I could have articulated, but somewhere underneath the ordinary movements of a Saturday afternoon, something in me had already processed the information. I just hadn't given myself permission to read it. I found the text by accident. Serena had left her phone on the kitchen counter and gone upstairs to get Noah from his bath, and I picked it up automatically when it buzzed. I sometimes fielded her messages when she was occupied with the boys, practical texts from her mother or the school. It was habitual, unreflective. The screen showed a preview before I could decide not to read it. D. Thinking about you. That's all. 3 seconds. That's how long I looked at it. Then I set the phone face down on the counter and stood very still. D. Derek's name started with D. So did 4 other people in her contacts, probably. So did the woman from her old design firm she still occasionally talked to. D was not evidence. D was a letter. That's thinking about you. That's all was not a message you sent to a friend's wife about railing repairs. I went upstairs. I helped with bath time. I read Caleb his story and Noah his chapter. I came back downstairs and Serena was in the kitchen and her phone was in her hand, and she glanced at the screen briefly and her face did the small interior lighting thing, and then she set it face down again. She didn't know I'd seen the message. I had replaced the phone exactly where she'd left it. You okay? She asked. Just tired, I said. I was learning a new language, the language of people who know something and are not ready to say it yet. I called Pam 2 days later. Not to confront. To ask. Carefully, without framing that would close the conversation before it started. I said, when you called in October, you seemed worried about Serena. I've been thinking about that call. Is there something you know that you didn't tell me? A long silence. Joel, she said. Just my name. But the way she said it, The specific weight of it, the apology packed into 2 syllables, told me that she knew. That she had known when she called. That the call itself had been some kind of attempt to do something without being able to do it directly. How long, I said. Another silence. I'm not sure I should. Pam. A few months, she said. I think. I'm not certain of everything. She told me some of it. She didn't tell me all of it. Derek. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. I thanked her. I hung up. I sat in my car in the school parking lot for 20 minutes while second period started without me. And I thought about a man I had known for 20 years eating dinner at my table and playing with my sons and building something in my kitchen while I was in the backyard with water bottles. I want to be honest about this part because it's the part that's easiest to misrepresent. I didn't become calculating. I didn't plan. What I did was the thing people do when they're trying to hold themselves together while something beneath them is collapsing. I controlled what I could control. I went to work. I taught my classes. I came home and made dinner and helped with homework and read bedtime stories. I was present for my sons in the specific, intense way of a person who needs something concrete to hold on to. And I paid attention. I checked the phone bill, our shared account, which I had always had access to and never used. The number of texts between Serena's phone and one number, a number I ran against Derek's contact information and confirmed with a certainty that left no room for alternative theory, was not the number of texts between friends. Not even close. I didn't read the content. I want to be clear about that. I looked at the frequency and the timestamps, and I put the bill down. The timestamps told the story I needed. Mornings, when I was already at school. Midday, while the boys were at preschool and kindergarten and Serena was ostensibly home. Late evenings, after the boys were asleep. And this one I came back to 3 times, several extended exchanges on a Thursday 2 months ago when I had been at a teacher's conference in Atlanta and hadn't come home until late. A Thursday. I thought about the Thursday. About what I had assumed was happening at home while I was in Atlanta sitting through sessions on curriculum development. Even now, the specific anger of that particular Thursday is different from everything else. Not because of what it means about them. Because of what it means about me, that I was sitting in a conference room believing I had a marriage, while the evidence of what I actually had was being written in real time. The red herring arrived in the form of a man named Curtis. Curtis was a parent at Noah's school, divorced, recently moved to Millbrook, the kind of person who attaches quickly to available social structures. He'd been at several school events. He'd spoken to Serena at pickup a few times in the animated way of someone who is looking for connection and recognizes it in others. I had noticed him noticing her. Had felt, briefly, the low-frequency discomfort of a husband who sees another man registering his wife's attractiveness. For about 2 weeks, I focused on Curtis. I built a version of the story around him. It was, in retrospect, the version I preferred, not because it was less painful, but because Curtis was a stranger. A stranger's betrayal is clean. It doesn't come to your dinner table and drink your beer and call you brother. Then I let myself look at the phone bill again. Curtis had a different area code. The number on the bill was local. Millbrook local. I had known it was Derek the whole time. The Curtis hypothesis had been shelter, a temporary structure I'd built to delay the moment I had to say the real name out loud. The proof arrived complete and accidental, the way these things do. I came home early on a Friday in December, a teacher's workday that ended at noon, which I hadn't mentioned to Serena because it had slipped out of our conversation in the usual way of things that seem unimportant until they aren't. I pulled into the driveway and Derek's truck was parked at the curb. I sat in my car for a moment. My hand was on the door handle and I was aware of my own breathing in a way I don't usually notice. Regular. Slower than I would have expected. The sky was the flat gray of a Georgia December. A cardinal in the oak tree at the corner of the yard, the mailbox with its red flag up from a letter Serena had left for pickup that morning. The ordinary world, exactly as it always was. I got out of the car. I didn't use my key loudly. I didn't announce myself. I'm not sure whether that was deliberate, a decision to catch rather than warn, or simply the residue of a man who has been moving quietly in his own house for months, careful not to disturb whatever was happening beneath the surface. The kitchen was empty. The living room was empty. I heard voices upstairs, Serena's and Derek's, conversation volume, nothing dramatic. I stood at the bottom of the stairs and understood that I did not need to go up. I already had everything. I went into the kitchen. I made coffee. I did this slowly, with the specific deliberateness of someone occupying their hands while their mind finalizes a decision. The coffee maker ran through its cycle. I poured a cup. I stood at the counter and I drank it. I heard movement upstairs, then footsteps on the stairs. Then Derek appeared in the kitchen doorway and stopped. He was holding his jacket. His face did something complicated, a sequence of calculations running in fast succession, landing on something that wasn't quite shame and wasn't quite defiance. Something in between. Something that looked, in the end, like a man who had been caught and had known he would be caught eventually and had not prepared adequately for the actual moment. "Joel," he said. "Hey," I said. Serena appeared behind him. She looked at me and her face went still, the specific stillness of someone whose fear has resolved into something beyond fear. She was wearing a sweater I recognized, and her hair was slightly undone from its usual arrangement, and her eyes were completely clear. Whatever she had been expecting from this moment, she was meeting it directly. Neither of them said anything. "Boys are at school," I said. "We have time." What followed was not a scene. I want to be clear about that because the word confrontation implies something that this wasn't. Nobody yelled. Nobody threw anything. Nobody said the things that people say in movies about betrayal. What happened was a conversation that had the specific quality of a structure being surveyed after a collapse. We were walking through the damage, taking measurements, noting what had held and what hadn't. Derek tried to speak twice. The first time I looked at him, and he stopped. The second time I said, "I need to talk to my wife. Please go." He went. I heard the front door. I heard his truck. Then it was just Serena and me in the kitchen we had chosen together, and the coffee I had made, and the December light coming through the window at the angle it always came through in winter. "How long?" I said. 5 months. "Is it?" I stopped. Restarted. "Is it serious?" She looked at the table. "I don't know what it is." "That's an answer." "I know." She looked up. Her eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying, and I understood this as a choice. She was refusing to use grief as a shield. "I know it doesn't make sense. I know it doesn't explain anything. But I need to tell you something true, Joel, even if it sounds terrible." I waited. "I stopped knowing who I was," she said. "Not because of you, not entirely. But I needed someone to see me as something other than a mother. Something other than a wife. And Derek," she stopped. "He made me feel like I existed." The words were honest. They were also the most painful things she'd said, not because they were about Derek, but because of what they implied about me. About years of ordinary evenings and unremarked mornings and compliments I'd meant to offer and hadn't. I realized something in that moment that I'm still working through. Her need wasn't unreasonable. The need to be seen, to exist outside your function, to have someone register you as a person rather than a role, that's not weakness. What was unreasonable was the direction she chose for it. But I had contributed to the conditions. I cannot pretend otherwise. "I need to ask you something," I said, "and I need a straight answer." She nodded. "Did you want to get caught?" She was quiet for a long time. Then, I think part of me did. "Yes." I finished my coffee. The cardinal was still in the oak tree. Or a different cardinal. I couldn't tell. "I need you to leave for a while," I said. "I need time with the boys without. I need time." She nodded. She didn't argue. She went upstairs. She packed a bag. She called her mother. She came back downstairs and she stood in the hallway and she looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on her face before, stripped of performance, stripped of management, just a woman standing in the damage she'd made and not hiding from it. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know," I said. The door closed. She stayed at her mother's for 6 weeks. I told the boys that Mom was helping Grandma with some things, which satisfied Caleb completely and satisfied Noah for approximately 3 days before he asked a more specific question that I answered with the careful partial truth available to a parent managing the jagged edge of adult catastrophe near a child's world. Derek, I did not speak to again for a long time. There was nothing to say that wouldn't be primarily about my own pain, and I had no interest in performing my pain for an audience. He sent a message 2 weeks after the kitchen conversation, a long one, from what I could tell by the scroll length before I deleted it without reading. Some things don't benefit from elaboration. Pam came by in January. She stood on the porch and said she was sorry, and I could tell she meant it. I told her she wasn't the one who had done anything to apologize for. She'd tried, in her way. That October phone call had been an attempt. She hadn't been able to do it more directly. I understood that. Loyalty is complicated when it runs between two people who are hurting each other. Serena asked if we could try in February. She'd been seeing a therapist. She said it with the specific care of someone who is presenting evidence of effort. She said she understood if I couldn't. She said she wasn't asking me to decide immediately. I thought about it for 3 weeks. I thought about 7 years. I thought about the boys in the house on Sycamore Street and the way the light came through the kitchen window in winter. I thought about the woman at the bathroom mirror who had looked at her own reflection like she was meeting someone she'd missed. I thought about the question I should have asked behind that observation. Not "you look good," but "who have you been missing?" and what that question might have opened between us. I thought about whether I could look at her across the kitchen table and not see the 5 months. Whether I could touch her and not feel the distance between what I'd assumed and what had been real. Whether the structure of US could be rebuilt or whether what had been damaged was load-bearing. I decided I couldn't. Not from anger. Not from pride. From a clear-eyed understanding that the trust required to rebuild was something I no longer had access to, and that pretending otherwise would be its own kind of damage, slower, quieter, but damage nonetheless. I called her and told her. She cried. Not dramatically. She had the same refusal of performance she'd had in the hallway, the same willingness to meet the moment directly. She said she understood. She said she hoped I'd eventually be okay. I told her I already was, which was only partially true but was true enough. The divorce was finalized in June. The boys adjusted the way children adjust, not without pain, but with the remarkable adaptability of people who haven't yet decided what is and isn't survivable. Noah asked hard questions, and I answered them as honestly as I could manage. Caleb asked if I would still come to his birthday party. I told him it was his party, and I would always be there. Serena moved into a rental near her mother's. She went back to work in the fall, interior design, part-time at first, a local firm that had been looking for someone with her background. She seemed, the few times I saw her at handoffs, to be finding the ground she'd lost. I was glad for that. It would have been easier, maybe, to not be, to need her diminished as evidence that what happened had been only about her failures. But I didn't need that. She had failed. I had contributed to the conditions. Both things were true. One morning in October, a year after everything, I dropped the boys at Serena's, and she came to the door, and she looked the way she had looked in the bathroom mirror that night, present, inhabiting herself here. She'd done something different with her hair. She was wearing the terracotta cardigan. She caught me looking. "You look good," I said. She smiled. Genuine, all the way through. "Thank you, Joel." I drove home on the back roads, through the Georgia fall, the maples doing their annual reckless color, and I thought about what it means to see someone clearly, really clearly, and whether it's something you learn or something you have to lose before you understand it. The road was empty. The sky was enormous. I was okay. Serena's story is ultimately about the gap between invisibility and infidelity, and how long that gap can silently close before anyone notices. She didn't fall for Derek because she loved Joel less. She fell because she had been starving for a specific kind of attention for years. The attention that says, "I see you as a person, not just as your function." That hunger is entirely human and entirely understandable. What it doesn't justify is the direction she chose to feed it. What makes this story psychologically specific is the role of self-esteem as the engine of the affair rather than its symptom. Serena didn't lose herself because the marriage was bad. She lost herself through a series of small surrenders. Her career, her professional identity, her habit of positioning herself to be seen. Each one reasonable in isolation, each one quietly compounding. By the time she stood at the bathroom mirror in Burgundy, she had been operating on a deficit of self for years. Derek didn't offer her love. He offered her visibility. In her depleted state, those felt identical. Joel's failure was the particular failure of a loving man who confused stability with sufficiency. He was not cruel. He was not neglectful in any dramatic sense. He was simply a person who stopped asking certain questions because the surface of things looked intact. The compliment he thought about and didn't say, the October call from Pam, he didn't press further. These weren't acts of indifference. They were acts of comfort. His own comfort. Choosing not to disturb what appeared to be working. By the time the kitchen conversation happened, both of them were standing in damage that had been accumulating for years beneath a surface that neither of them had wanted to examine. The affair was the moment the surface gave way. The damage had been there much longer. What stays with me most about this story is the bathroom mirror. That moment, a woman looking at herself with recognition after years of not quite seeing her own reflection, is where everything was already in motion. Joel saw it. He said, "You look good." And then he moved on. I think most of us have been in that doorway. We see someone we love reaching for something, and we offer a comment instead of a conversation. Not because we don't care. Because a conversation costs something. It opens a door you might not be ready to walk through. The hardest thing this story asks is not how do you recover from betrayal. It's what would it have taken to see the need before it became a crisis? That question doesn't have a clean answer, but it's worth sitting with. Because sometimes the person standing at the mirror isn't showing you how good they look. They're showing you how long they've been waiting to feel that way.